there's a couple themes that I'm hearing about, and then ones that I think we should be hearing more about. Obviously, there's a ton of discussion about LLMs and the promise and how they can make people work smarter, talk a lot about efficiency. I don't think there's enough conversation yet about people. How do we make people far more effective, not just more efficient? How do you get to more value added work and get rid of some of the drudgery? So we think that a lot of the opportunity is the change management with people. The technology is fantastic, but I think it's the people question that we're not talking enough about. So the first thing I did at McKinsey when I joined 18 years ago is we created the decision journey because we knew that no longer was everything linear. And so we created, which was pretty revolutionary at the time. I think the whole consumer decision journey right now is getting upended. The whole idea of how you get into that initial discovery is no longer in control, or mostly in control of the brands. It is about thinking about the LLMs and where are they pulling content from. And if we think about GEO as well, it's having a huge impact on what brands are selected, what brands are recommended. And we also see an opportunity, or we see a path where agents are actually making decisions. They're putting it in your shopping cart and actually transacting for you. Very different than the decision journey that we created back in 2007. I think some of the things, so it may be about how brands get selected, but it is still a nonlinear process. This is no longer, or it's not as much about what brands are actually going to say. And consumers are still a little bit leery of hearing kind of the brand's opinion on it. So the idea of peer-to-peer, and now we're seeing a lot more with creators and influencers. So that's playing a much bigger role. So that was there in the early days of the decision journey, but playing a much bigger role right now. The idea of the loyalty loop, which was a big part of the consumer decision journey, we're also seeing that loyalty starting to erode a lot. So we saw some of that during COVID, and even more so now where there's so many new brands, so many new opportunities, and a lot of new opinions about what brands to choose. A lot of people are asking the application of AI, or people are doing AI, and then who's actually getting results. And I think there's a few things that we see. One is, what is the incentive for quote unquote doing AI? And I think what we see is a lot of it is coming from the board. A lot of it is coming from the CEO is saying, what are we doing? I need to be able to have a story on it. What we then find is you've got a lot of companies that have got distinct pilots, and they're kind of looking at some work that they do and they say, how can I apply AI? Is there an efficiency? Can I show a use case? Those are the same companies that are often in what we call pilot purgatory. What we've found is the ones that are really driving the value aren't just looking at specific use cases, but they're stepping back and they're looking at how marketing gets done. They're looking at the workflows within it, and quite frankly, reimagining and rewiring how marketing gets done. They then look and say, how can AI play a role in that? But it's not all about AI and agentic. It is about truly rewiring marketing to get to impact. The companies that do that, we're seeing 2 to 3 times % more growth and still also efficiency. If we start thinking about the C-suite, everyone is talking about AI, and then you look domain by domain. Clearly, we've talked about how it's impacting marketing and the CMO, but what we see equally important is the relationship between the CMO, the CFO, the CEO, and quite frankly, the rest of the C-suite. It has got to be an enterprise decision. This cannot be done something that is in a box. Part of it goes back to what are the domains that will matter? We see marketing all the time being one of those top domains where AI can have a huge impact. I think the second thing is understanding what is the economic leverage point within those domains and solving for that. And that goes back to some of that rewiring. But all of that then is what is critical is that you've got a partnership between, again, the CMO, the CFO, the CIO, is absolutely critical, and all the way up to the C-suite. All of these things are rolling up to the board, and they're not just asking, what are we doing? But the smart ones are also asking, show us the impact. And you could argue some of the things I said, well, those relationships have always been important. We have written articles and done research on this the last 2 years, and the importance of the CMO with the C-suite, absolutely critical. I truly believe that the questions are getting asked, people don't really know the answer. And so it is more important that these groups are working together. We had just met, I was in Silicon Valley last week. We met with our alliance partners, and the reality is no one knows what tomorrow brings. There are not, a lot of clients will ask, give me the 4 use cases where it's been done so I can actually feel confident. Those don't exist. They can talk about the companies that are on that journey. And so therefore, I think what's different is they need to be even more together in this decision because it's going to be a learning decision all along. It's also not just a technology decision. As we were talking about earlier, this is fundamentally a people opportunity as well. So the CHRO, he or she becomes a critical part of driving this transformation. So I look at all this through a couple of lenses. So while I've been at McKinsey for 18 years, but I've also been a practitioner for 15 years, including being a global CMO in a couple of places. The things that I question are, the silver bullet. I actually walk the croisette and I hear lots of stories about these huge success stories at scale. Here's all the impact. This could be yours. I'm a little skeptical of that. And then I talk to some of the clients and friends that I've met here, and they say, show me, what's that really look like? And the reality is there's not a ton of great use cases. There's many companies that are on the journey doing some of the stuff that we've talked about, but I think anyone who claims that they've done it multiple times at scale, and here's the single recipe, and this can be you in 2 months, I'm incredibly skeptical of it. I think the other piece, not a surprise based on what we've talked about, is if they're not talking about the change management and the people piece of it, I think that undermines a lot of what I'm hearing as well.